Well, good evening, everyone. I'm so glad you're with us. My name is Terry Eichel, and I am the Executive Director for the Interreligious Eco-Justice Network. We are a faith-based environmental group here in Connecticut, and we work with religious communities on issues like climate change, toxic pollution, and biodiversity loss. And I want to say a special thank you to Tom Cameron and the Hartford Friends meeting for co-sponsoring this webinar with us this evening and the screening of the story of plastic, which you've been able to view over this past week. When Tom came to me a couple months ago, we're very grateful for the great idea and the energy around addressing this important issue. And I also want to thank IREJN's board member, Lynn Johnson, who also has been working very, very hard to promote this event and promote awareness on this topic. So we are joined also by Suzette Munley, who is going to give us a fabulous presentation on plastics and what we can do. Now, let me see if I can move my, but I'd like to actually, I want to turn it over to Tom really briefly so that he can also give a welcome.
Thank you, Terry. As Terry mentioned, I'm from the Hartford Quaker meeting in West Hartford with a little bit of background on how we came together this evening. The idea behind tonight's meeting started with our voluntary Hartford meeting carbon tax witness group through an initial contact with the organization from Vermont, Beyond Plastics. We received further support from the Hartford Friends Peace and Social Concerns Committee and one of our tax witness members, Lynn Johnson, as Terry mentioned. Special thanks to Lynn, because this is really what made this program quite the success tonight. So I want to say thank you to Terry for being a great partner and extend a warm welcome to each of you from IREJN and the Hartford meeting to tonight's discussion of the story of plastic. Back to you, Terry.
All right, thank you so much. So Suzette's going to do a presentation, and then if you have questions, please put them in the chat or the Q&A. I have a little bit of feedback that maybe the chat is misbehaving. So if it is, the Q&A appears to be working. And then we will open it up after Suzette's presentation for questions. So Suzette has been a restaurateur for 20 plus years in Philadelphia, where she has had a front row view of the growing presence of plastic in the hospitality industry. As chief operating officer, she was able to steer her own business away from this path and onto more sustainable methods. She developed a waste reduction program centered on reuse and collaborated with suppliers to reduce plastic packaging. Currently, Suzette serves as board president of the Center City Business Association. She also serves on the board of Penn Future, working to transition Pennsylvania to a clean energy economy, and is a certified climate reality leader. In 2022, Suzette completed Beyond Plastics' plastic pollution course, after which she activated her township environmental advisory council to introduce a single-use plastic bag ban, which was passed in July 2023. She joined forces with a coalition of 30 plus townships driving bans across Pennsylvania. As a volunteer speaker for Beyond Plastics, Suzette aims to shift mindsets of audiences to support policy change through presentations on plastic pollution and the effects on our health, water, environmental justice, and the recycling myth. I will stop my share. All right, so great. Thank you so much, Suzette. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, if folks have questions, please put them in the chat and the Q&A. But right now, I'm just going to turn it over to Suzette.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you, Tom, for having me this evening. It's always nice when people are interested in learning more about plastic pollution and what they can do to help us shift where we're headed. So thanks, everyone, for joining us tonight. For those of you that aren't aware, Beyond Plastics is an environmental advocacy organization that seeks to end plastic pollution. So when I give an educational presentation, I anchor it on these 4 pillars: the impact of plastic pollution to our oceans, environmental justice, the impact to our health, and the recycling myth. And tonight I'm mainly going to focus on health and the recycling myth, and how you can all get involved to create change. So a little bit of background, we'll touch on it briefly. How did we get here? So I think one of the most amazing aspects of the plastic crisis is how recent it is. So of the nearly 10 billion tons of plastic in existence today, approximately half was manufactured in the last 18 years. So this crisis is happening in our lifetime. And we know that plastic is ubiquitous, right? We cannot avoid it in our daily life. Even if you're super careful about your consumer choices, you cannot avoid the packaging. 42% of current plastic production is for packaging, like you see here. And as you saw in the movie, we know that plastics are made from fossil fuels. So today, almost all plastics are made from ethane, which is a byproduct of hydrofrac gas. But turning petroleum or ethane into a plastic fork or any plastic item won't just happen through temperature or pressure. It takes chemicals, and a lot of them. So additives are required to give plastics their stability, their color, and flexibility. And plastics contain more than 10,000 chemicals, and over 2,400 are considered substances of concern. And plastics are highly linked to chemical exposure. So one chemical, PFOA or PFAS, is a lining in many of our food packages, like this microwavable popcorn. So if you take away just one thing from this talk tonight, let it be this. Do not eat anything that is cooked or microwaved in plastic, because when the molecules heat up, the chemical additives will migrate into the food. And we know that plastic pollutes at every stage, from fossil fuel extraction to what happens to it after it is used. So it contributes to climate change at every stage. And I really love this graphic from the film. It really shows how uncircular the plastic life cycle is. And the fact is, the petrochemical industry plans to triple plastic production by 2050 and has announced major new plastic-related production facilities in Louisiana, Texas, North Dakota, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. And according to Food and Water Watch, industry has invested more than $200 billion into this expansion. There are 333 new petrochemical facilities that have been proposed or permitted since 2010. And so now, what about the people living in the areas where these processes occur? Well, we saw in the story of plastics the devastation of the communities where we are shipping our plastic waste overseas. But what's happening here in the US? Because we are the biggest producer of plastic in the world. Well, the vast majority of people living in the communities where these processes are occurring are low income and/or people of color. The demographics with the least power to say, not in my backyard. So it's no coincidence that their neighborhoods are the chosen residents for petrochemical facilities. And the health risk has become so prominent in frontline communities that the epicenter of plastic production in the US, which is located in Louisiana, has come to be called Cancer Alley. And Cancer Alley is predominantly a Black region of Louisiana that is home to 150 industrial plants, many of them petrochemical plants. And this is the 85-mile stretch of those chemical plants and oil refineries. So this is a Christmas parade in Cancer Alley. The EPA estimates that the residents of this region have a 95% higher risk of cancer from air pollution than the rest of the country. So as a consequence of having their neighborhoods taken over by petrochemical facilities, the people living on the front lines and the ones that are working in these facilities are at a much higher risk than the average person to develop illnesses. So these range from respiratory conditions due to particulate matter entering the lungs, to slowed delivery of oxygen to vital organs, to new or worsened asthma symptoms, to reproductive system damage and birth defects, to cancer. In the latest local incident, there was a train derailment that occurred in February of this year when 38 cars of a Norfolk Southern freight train carrying hazardous materials derailed in East Palestine, Ohio. So no one was injured, but about half of the region's population was evacuated for days when authorities ignited the vinyl chloride in 5 cars to prevent an explosion, which they later determined didn't need to take place. But vinyl chloride is used almost exclusively to make polyvinyl chloride plastic, which we all know as PVC, which is used to make pipes and kitchenware, but it's hazardous to produce and dispose of. The International Agency of Research on Cancer considers it a group 1 carcinogen, and it's associated with liver damage and cancer. So another thing to think about regarding the building blocks of plastic is that fossil fuels are highly flammable. So what is it that keeps all of our fleece jackets, our rain boots, carpets, couches from bursting into flame? Well, it's flame retardants. So many of the chemicals in flame retardants are endocrine disruptors, and they trick the body into thinking that they are hormones. So under normal circumstances, hormones carry messages that act like on-off switches. Common hormones are estrogen, testosterone, and the human growth hormone. Their presence in our bodies is like a dance that is very carefully timed. Endocrine disruptors upset this dance, even in very low doses, and they affect important systems all over the body. They can impact the hormones that regulate our appetite and metabolism, causing obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure, and heart disease. They can disrupt brain development, causing lower IQ, ADHD, and autism spectrum disorders. And they can cause cancers, especially breast, prostate, and testicular cancers, all of which are on the uptick. And we also saw in the movie that plastic waste is also a global economic, environmental, and social issue. So in addition to the plastic pollution problems in the United States, the US, like many wealthier countries, is exporting plastic waste, often under the guise of recycling, to countries that are unable to safely manage it. So at the core of plastic pollution and climate disruption is the mistaken belief that the Earth's resources are infinite and that we have the right to use them for our benefit, even when the resulting harmful consequences are often directly borne by the lives and ecosystems of those who often have little or no voice or economic or political power. The US, one of the most developed countries in the world, utterly fails on recycling. We generate far more waste and recycle far less than any other developed country. For the US, there's a problem of excess. A highly consumerist society fuels standards of commercial practice that is wildly unsustainable for the planet. In fact, if everyone lived like the US population, we would need 4 planets to make everything it consumes. And we know that plastic doesn't go away or break down into the environment over time. It breaks apart into smaller and smaller pieces called microplastics. They're about the size of a grain of sand, and they are literally everywhere. So this microfiber is so small that it has hitched a ride on a snowflake. Here's an insect covered in microplastics that was found earlier this year. And in rain and snow, and as dust swept up by wind, microplastics are distributed to literally every portion of the earth. They have been found at the bottom of the Marianas Trench, which is the deepest oceanic trench on Earth, and at the top of Mount Everest. So think about this. In one lifetime, humans have coated the planet with a fine layer of permanent microplastics. So where do the microplastics we ingest come from? Well, microplastics have been found in drinking water, much more so in single-use plastic water bottles. It's been found in beer, it's been found in honey, it's in fish, it's in the air we breathe in. So all of us ingest or breathe in about the equivalent of 1 credit card of plastic every single week, no matter where you live. It's also in seafood, especially anything you eat whole, like mussels or shrimp. And speaking of plastic water bottles, let's remember they aren't producing water. They're producing plastic bottles. And over 1 trillion plastic bottles are purchased every day. So if you're looking to do one thing, ditch those plastic water bottles. So we're continuing to learn about the health impacts of plastic when it breaks apart into microplastics. So this is a groundbreaking report from 2020, which showed the first evidence of microplastics in human placenta. In 2021, a team of Italian scientists demonstrated that microplastics are crossing into the placenta and are present in the fetus at birth. Then in March of 2022, we learned of plastic polymers discovered in human blood. And in April, microplastics were found lodged deep in the lungs of living people for the first time. In June, they were also found in human breast milk. And this was just released in March of this year. The Minderoo Foundation brought together world-leading researchers from the fields of healthcare, the ocean, and the environment to launch the Minderoo Monaco Commission on Plastics and Human Health. There were 48 authors on this report. So this monumental piece of research quantifies plastic's considerable risk to all life on Earth. The Commission's findings leave no room for doubt that current plastic production, use, and disposal patterns are not sustainable and are responsible for significant harm to human health, the environment, and the economy, as well as deep societal injustices. And we know we cannot recycle our way out of this. So Americans discarded 51 million metric tons of plastic in 2021, but less than 6% of all plastic was recycled. 85% of plastic waste in the US is landfilled. An NPR investigative report found in 2020 that industry officials misled the public about the recyclability of plastic, even though their own report showed that they knew as early as 1970s and the 1980s that plastic could not be economically recycled. And industry documents also show that starting in 1989, oil and plastics executives began a quiet campaign to lobby almost 40 states to mandate that this chasing arrow symbol you see on the screen appear on all plastic, even if there was no way to economically recycle it. And at the time, some environmentalists also supported the symbol, thinking it would help separate plastic. But what it did was make all plastic look recyclable, and it's not. So in your own lives, you should only put number 1 and number 2 plastic in your recycling bin. The rest of them are not recycled. And plastic isn't actually recycled, it's downcycled into something of lesser value. It's not like glass or aluminum, which can be made into products that have the same value over and over. And plastic degrades each time it is reused. So that means it can't be reused more than once or twice. Here's a quick image of some corporate greenwashing, what they say versus what they do. So in red, you'll see the percentage of promises made to use recyclable materials, and in the blue, you'll see where people actually, what their actual usage was. This goes back to 2019, and the report was published in 2020. So big companies are pretty far off in delivering what they say they're going to do. And we know that the climate crisis is here. So according to NASA, the past 9 years have been the warmest years since modern record keeping began. 2023 is likely to be the hottest year ever. And we know that we've just finished the hottest decade ever recorded. So we want to turn off the tap on plastic production. So how do we do that? Well, you can create a Beyond Plastics local group or an affiliate group to get people in your community active in creating change. And anywhere you see these QR codes on the screen, you can scan with your phone, your camera, and it'll take you to a page that gives you information about this. I did this in my local area with the Climate Reality Group for Southeast PA in Philadelphia. It's easy to do, and it's a good way to get people involved. And Beyond Plastics has a theory of change, which is you work at your local level to ban plastic bags, ban polystyrene, and plastic straws only upon request. So if you can work in your community and then eventually work up the ladder at a state level, gives us the ability to push harder on a federal level. So right now, 9 states have bag laws: California, Maine, Colorado, New Jersey, Delaware, New York, Oregon, Vermont, and Washington. But as you can see on this map here, there are many, many towns that have local bag bans as well as polystyrene. So I found a coalition near me that was comprised of Township Environmental Advisory Council members, and they were all working on single-use plastic bag bans. They've now grown to a really large group. There's currently 24 municipalities that have passed single-use bag bans. There's another dozen or so working on them. We changed our verbiage from plastic bag bans to plastic pollution reduction ordinances, and it seemed to be received much more openly because it is about reducing pollution, and a lot of people don't like the word ban. If you don't have an EAC in your township or community, you can start one. I reached out to the chair of mine, and she was really happy to have me get involved, and we found some great success with that. The great news about this coalition is you don't have to reinvent the wheel. They have all the tools that you need, from PowerPoints to model and sample ordinances to surveys, everything you could possibly need to make this happen in your township. So I'm happy to connect you and share all these resources if anyone is interested. And there are a lot of regulations that can be used to achieve our goals, but most are based on the same fundamental principle, which is called extender producer responsibility. So in a nutshell, you make it, you take it. So that's where the producer assumes responsibility for the life cycle of the product. This will create systemic change. So currently, 4 states have enacted extender producer responsibility laws for packaging: Maine, Oregon, Colorado, and California, and New York is working really hard on one. So we're going to touch on 3 key components to strong EPR bills. One is packaging standards make sense, right? We have fuel efficiency standards for vehicles. We have energy efficiency standards for appliances. So these make sense for packaging. 2 is that the chemical additives that go into plastics in the first place should not be toxic and harmful to our health. And the 3rd is about disposal methods that involve burning. So whether it's in an open pit or waste to energy incinerators, these are toxic and must be halted. And the Assembly member, Engelbright in New York, has really great, strong definition of this language in the EPR bill that they're trying to pass. So that's a good model for all of us to follow. And then there's one piece of federal legislation, the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, that kind of bundles all of these concepts and more, and it's gaining popularity. So here you can contact your senator or congressperson, ask them to co-sponsor it. Right now, where it stands is it needs to be reintroduced to Congress. It looks like Senator Jared Huffman out of California will do this. But some of the highlights are it requires producers of packaging, containers, and food service products to design, manage, and finance waste collection and recycling programs for all material types. It would create a nationwide beverage container refund program, which have been very successful for states, and it stops plastic from being shipped overseas to developing countries. So this page, again, you can scan that QR code on your screen if you like. It would take you to a page to help you find the phone numbers of your senators and state representatives, as well as it provides a script to use to ask them to co-sponsor the Break Free from Plastic bill. And if you scan this QR code, it will take you to a page that looks like these tabs on the left, and it has a list of actions we can all take. So they all link back to the Beyond Plastics website action page. So Beyond Plastics has done all the heavy lifting and created all the tools you need to take action. So there's a page for dry cleaners to convince them to stop using non-recyclable plastic film. There's a page to ask people to replace plastic bottles and vending machines with cans. There's a page that asks Amazon to change their packaging practices. And there's also another page which gives you the ability to reach out to stores to drop single-use plastic. I don't think most of us need our cucumbers wrapped in plastic film. You can sign up for Beyond Plastics mailing lists. It keeps you up to date on new developments and events. Here are some trainings that are happening in December. If you're interested in creating affiliate groups or local groups, this really gives you the training of how to do that and do it successfully and give you the tools that you need. And then this screen just shows some great books if anybody wants to dive further into this. Countdown by Shanna Swan really gets into endocrine disruptors in our health. People interested in microplastics and nanoplastics. This is an amazing book, A Poison Like No Other, from Matt Simon. And there's others listed here that really give you a comprehensive view of the problem that we're trying to tackle. Environmental Health News is a great website. They have all sorts of newsletters. I've listed two here that have been really helpful. One is Above the Fold, and the other is a plastic pollution newsletter that gives you a ton of information if you want to stay abreast on what's happening in the industry. And with that, I thank you all. There's my email if any of you would like to reach out and would like assistance in whatever you're trying to get off the ground in your communities. I am more than happy to help. So I think we're going to move into some discussion and Q&A. Let me stop my slideshow and stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much. That was great and disturbing at the same time. It's very. So that was something else. I had heard the credit card equivalent. I had not heard it was every one a week. That was staggering. One of the things that actually really impacted me from the movie was when, I can't remember who it was, but he was standing there talking about all the different types of plastic that were in the bundle and saying, like, this plastic is different from this plastic. And sometimes they can just tap on it and hear the sound and they know what kind of plastic it is. Sometimes they set it on fire and they can smell the type of plastic. And I thought, oh my gosh, and the other thing that they made the point of is, of course, it burns really well because it's mostly made of petroleum, which I thought, oh, of course. So I mean, we've got a lot of questions and I know people will have questions, but one of the things I want to say is Connecticut actually passed a plastic bag ban in 2021, I believe, and it worked really well for a minute. And then what the stores did was they introduced thicker bags because we had sort of a limit of how thick the bags could be. That was sort of how we got it passed. And so eventually they're like, well, these bags are reusable and they're just these thicker plastic bags. It's awful. What is the answer to that? Do we just have to keep going back until we get rid of single-use plastic bags?
Yeah, so I think some of us that came after that have learned from some of that feedback from people that were able to do that earlier. So in the ordinances that most of us have passed recently, there isn't anything in the ordinance about the thickness of the bag. So it becomes about the language of stitched handles, and it can be used, at least 175 times, or it can be washed and put in the dryer. So the language in the ordinances became different so that we could kind of get out of that trap.
Right. Yeah, that was that's been a sort of disturbing development over what was initially quite a big success. So and it's funny, once I found out, the fossil fuel industry is sort of understands that energy is not where their future lies now, is in plastics. And once I learned that and I started looking around, I realized how many more things are in single-use plastic. Like there's a store, that my grocery store that's close to us has a small greeting card section, and every single greeting card is wrapped in a single plastic envelope. I won't buy a greeting card from there because I can't buy it without a plastic envelope. And that is something that is a very new development to me, where these things are coming with plastic.
Well, and I think you hit on a key point that we're not driving demand of the plastic. It's really a supply issue of using the petrochemicals and the ethane from fracking. They have this huge supply and it's subsidized, so it makes it really cheap. So they're pushing all this plastic out into the world that we're not asking for it. And so it's just like you go in the grocery store and so many things that never used to be wrapped in plastic are all wrapped in plastic. And, as much as it would be helpful for us to stand up against some of this, it's where it really comes down to, we need policy change where, it forces companies not to allow this to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, so we obviously, we work with the religious community. And so I'm always interested in the impact of, individual choices and individual actions, because I'm always like, individual actions are what we do that in our community. It becomes a larger community action and that sort of thing. But really, they also have to be influenced and reflected in the policy that we push for too. It's, as we can make lots of individual changes, and we should, but we have to incorporate pushing for policy change at the same time.
Agreed.
So Tom had some great questions. So he said, so is it more important for us to focus energy today mainly on the elimination of single-use plastic? Or should we also try and work on other types of plastic as well?
Well, I think one of the reasons we were focused on single use, it's not necessary. And we're trying to really encourage people. It's about reuse. It's not even about switching from single use plastic to single use paper bag. Like that's not the objective. It's how can we reuse things and be more sustainable? But when you look at some of the stats and you realize that 42% of plastic production is for packaging, it seems to be the low-hanging fruit that would make the most substantial difference. So if we could create some great extended producer responsibility laws that really address packaging, and knowing that 42% of the plastic is created for that, that's a huge win.
So, and it's actually, we passed an upgraded bottle bill, I want to say in 2022, and extended producer responsibility was a part of that. So in sort of relationship to that, Jenny has a question saying, regarding cans that have a 5-cent deposit on them, and Jenny, I think starting very, very soon, it's going to be a 10-cent deposit here in Connecticut, but she said, should I take them to a recycling center or machine, or are they really recycled if I put them in my curbside bin?
I guess it would depend on each individual area. It's hard for me to speak about what's happening in your local area. We know that recycling of glass and aluminum percentages are much higher than plastic, but they're not 100%. So I guess if you found a way to return them to someone that you knew were recycling them, that seems to be the better choice there.
I agree, honestly. I actually bring cans and bottles and anything with a deposit, I actually bring and recycle myself. My little town doesn't seem to have a functional recycling plan. So, I wind up bringing a bag of recyclables over to my sister's because her town has a good recycling plan. But yeah, the stuff with the deposit, I know if I bring it somewhere, that will do the deposit, I know it's going to get recycled then. So I always do that. Sometimes I'm there with like 8 bags because I let it go too long. Then let's see here. Someone else had a question here. Don said, I've recently heard that a huge percentage of the microplastic particles in the oceans result from auto tire wear, like tires. Can you elaborate on this?
You're right. Tires are a huge contributor to microplastics. I think it's north of 50% of the microplastics are coming from the breakdown of the tires against our roads on a daily basis. There's a lot of conversation about that. And the other kind of the piece that I never thought of before a while ago was turf. So all of our kids playing on turf fields and people replacing grass fields with turf is another substantial contributor to microplastics.
The AstroTurf is horrifying, and it's amazing how many towns are putting it in for their children to play on. I mean, it's that's disturbing. Julie wanted to know, why is it that improving the scrubbers on incinerators doesn't or won't or wouldn't work?
I don't know. I don't know a lot about scrubbers on incinerators. I don't know if Tom or you, Terry, have any more information on that.
Well, I know that, I guess it would have to depend, and this is a little bit out of my knowledge base, but what the scrubbers are designed to capture. Scrubbers are good for nitrogen oxide and sulfur dioxide, I think. I mean, I believe they're good for those types of particles. I don't know if they're good for the chemicals released from burning plastic. I know there's, and actually, Tom, did you want to talk a little bit about the mirror plant? If you want to come back on and talk a little bit about the mirror plant.
I don't have any recent information about that. I did see some of the governor's proposal.
Well, actually, why don't you give some background, though, because people on the webinar may not know what that is.
Okay, the mirror plant was the waste to energy plant where a lot of the recyclable materials were being sent and burned to produce energy. And that had, I think, expired its life cycle in terms of the materials that were used for doing the processing in the plant. And it got to the point that it was very expensive to try to replace those. So they faced the possibility of either putting in a new plant or shutting this plant down. And they couldn't justify doing the upgrades on the plant. So the choice was made to close the plant down. But that means that the large quantity of materials that were going through that plant now have to find a new place to go. And I believe that's what the governor is working on right now, is plans to take care of both the decommissioning of the plant and the new resourcing for those recyclables. And I think it's still in a pretty early stage of the discussion.
We did back before the pandemic, these webinars were in-person events called forums. And I want to say it was 2019 or 2018, we did a green forum on environmental racism. And one of our speakers was Sharon Lewis. And if anyone is here from Connecticut, she's the director for the Connecticut Coalition for Environmental Justice. And she was one of the speakers. And I said to her, what is an issue that contributes to environmental racism that would surprise most people? Because I knew that transportation pollution and that sort of thing was the sort of thing that people mostly associated. And she said plastic pollution. She said it's where it's created and where it's disposed of. They're all in poor, usually either very urban or very rural communities that don't have enough voice. They're often communities of color. And that has stayed with me all these years since, that was such a contributor to environmental racism.
Oh, and Tom, the link that you had sent me talked about possible next steps forward. Obviously, they were looking to reduce the amount of trash that is needed to be disposed of, right? One of the ways was going forward is composting, and the other was EPR bill for packaging. So if that's something that the state is really considering as a solution to this facility being closed, hearing from all the constituents that you are in support of EPR for packaging in your state would really go a long way.
So I have a question it's a two-parter from Tom. He said, how do we communicate these issues about plastic with our children? And is there a way for an individual or family to estimate their plastic footprint that will help identify the major plastic targets we should work on?
Yeah, I guess I would say from experience, I feel like with your children, if you change your habits, it becomes their new habits. So some of this can be a little complicated. If we look around, we're surrounded by plastics in our homes. And most of the times we don't even realize to what extent. But as something runs out, before you buy and replace that, can you replace it with something that isn't made of plastic? Whether it's as simple as your laundry detergent or simple as you run out of toothpaste, can you switch to a tablet toothpaste instead of a tube and a plastic tube? You're going to buy a spatula for your kitchen. Can you replace that with wood or stainless instead of plastic? Like anytime you're going to make a purchase, is there a way to purchase something that is not plastic? So I guess that would be kind of the first step, because it can be really overwhelming when you really start to look at all the plastic you're surrounded by. And I guess the other part with kids and with friends is if we can really get away from drinking out of plastic water bottles and buying single-use plastic water bottles and have our kids carrying around refillable bottles, it just really goes a long way. I know there's a lot of school programs now that are that provide grants to switch out their cafeterias so they don't have throwaway plates and flatware and trays back to the old days when we put everything through a dishwasher and you had stainless flatware and real plates and cups. So I think there's a lot of that work. You know, if they have vending machines in their schools, can we swap those out to put cans back in the vending machines instead of plastic bottles? So I think there's a lot of ways we can do that. And I think it's also kind of from a cooking standpoint. If you're cooking for your kids, that we're making sure we're teaching them not to heat things in plastic or microwave things in plastic, and just teaching them why. Or if you have really little ones, trying to stay away from, heating up plastic bottles. Anything that is connecting heat and plastic and then somewhere touching food or consuming it. I mean, when you think about it, even the kids playing sports, they take a plastic water bottle and they leave it outside in the summer and it's really hot out and it's heating up that water. Not only is it releasing microplastics, but it's releasing toxic chemicals into the water that they're drinking. So I think there's a lot of ways we can go about it, but I have found if I change my habits, the people around me ask why, and I'm telling them why, and then they tend to change their habits as well and think more about things than they would have before. I mean, I've honestly found that talking to hundreds of people and educating about plastic, I've never found an audience or even one person that wasn't astonished and just kind of like, oh my gosh, we need to do something about this. Most people just don't know. Most people don't know the health impact. Most people don't know what plastic's made from, and why there's so much of it, and the fact that it's a recent problem, right? So most people are kind of horrified and say, okay, how can we make small changes while we're also trying to affect change on a bigger level?
Wow, it's so interesting that people are so astonished, but it is astonishing the amount of plastic we've put on this planet in basically 40 years or so, like they said, in one lifetime or one generation. Lynn Johnson wanted me to invite everyone. There is a forum on waste, community forum on waste on November 9th at Emmanuel Church in Hartford, which is 10 Woodland Street at 7 p.m. And one of the topics will be the Mira plant and what's going to happen to it. But I know there are going to be other topics around waste. It's such a critical subject, and it was tackled in the last legislative session, but I don't know that, I don't know how much progress was actually made on it. So I know there will be opportunities for us to work on policy in this next legislative session. So I wanted to invite you to that. We also have another webinar on microplastics coming up on November 8th if you want to learn even more about microplastics with two young researchers from DC. One of them is our current IREJN secretary. So they've got some of the very cutting edge information, but if you want to learn more about that, that's November 8th. That will be online. The November 9th one is in person at Emmanuel Congregational Church. So let's see here. Julie wanted to know, where do the places that return the 5-cent deposit recycle what they receive? Or why is it so much better to ensure that they're actually recycled? Julie, are you asking where so if I take my bottles and cans or whatever to Stop and Shop, where do they send it? I think that's the question. Yes, that is a question. And so I will say part of the reason I take it to Stop and Shop is that I know my town's not doing it. But Suzette, do you know where they go from Stop and Shop?
I don't. I know that the higher the fee that we can implement on those bottle bills, the higher percentage that people actually will turn them in so they can be recycled.
Right. I mean, I believe they actually get sent to the companies or the industries where they actually get turned back into aluminum or, glass or a lower grade of plastic. Like they actually get done. If I bring them to my town's recycling bin, I think they just go to the incinerator in town. Pretty sure they're not actually taking the recycling anywhere. So I don't bring it there. But anyway, so let me see if I have another question here. So zero waste communities. Do we have successful zero waste communities in the U.S.? I know we've got a movement. We have a zero waste movement here in Connecticut. But do you know of zero waste communities in the U.S.?
So I think most cities have zero waste initiatives. So I think you might be surprised if you go online and look that up, that there's a lot of initiative around this, because let's face it, we have too much trash. When it leaves our house and goes out to our curb, it has to go somewhere. And so there's a lot of push for us to be able to reduce that. I will say that there is zerowaste.com and zerowaste.org for those of you looking to get more information, but also the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is an amazing foundation that deals with circular economy. They have a whole piece, they have tons and tons of educational materials, and they talk a lot about circularity, but also there's a big plastic initiative, and they put a lot of money into plastic research as well. So I think those are some good places to check out.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for those resources. So Alita has two questions. Is anything being done to stop the subsidies to the extractors and producers? And how do we respond to the arguments that we can't eliminate all plastics because there isn't another material for things like heart valves, automobile steering wheels, or laptop cases?
Yeah, you asked two of the hardest questions.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
So no, right now we are not aware of anything that's currently happening to reduce those subsidies, but that would be the kingpin of all of this if we could convince the government to not subsidize fossil fuel production. And as far as, what do we do with some of the things that we don't know what other material we would use? There are a lot of people working on that, especially in the medical industry. And there's a lot of, I'm sure you've all heard about like bio-based products. Now, none of them are really viable right now, but there's a lot of research happening to figure out alternatives. I guess the point of this is, if there was extended producer responsibility, which force companies to innovate and design, then they would put their R&D, research and development money into innovating new products, and that would get us so much closer to the finish line. Right now, they don't feel that pressure, and so you'll see a lot of, I don't know if in your area you're seeing a lot of commercials about recycling, and they're paid for by the American Chemical Council. And so those are exactly the people that want us to continue to make a ton more plastic. So that's tons of greenwashing. So it's, can we incent the people that are selling the products in plastic to figure out a better, different way to do it?
So the question, do you feel divestment is the strongest strategy, or do you think shareholder action is a viable strategy? Like how do we attack this from this, from a perspective of we are some people have investments and they can influence and, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so I think from most people I've talked to, it's invest in clean energy and divest from fossil fuels. Like if you really want to kind of take your stand and draw a line in the sand, we need to stop investing in extractive methods for our energy. So if we can put our money in clean energy sources, that will certainly help. And I agree with you, Terry, every little bit counts. But at some point, if plastic production is fossil fuels plan B and the government's still subsidizing that, we've got to build this groundswell from our local communities by banning things and working up to the state level to eventually get to the federal level to really affect change.
Mm-hmm. And so Julie wanted to know, what about the health industry, which uses a lot of single-use packaging in the name of keeping things sterile? What can they do?
Yeah, so Dr. Megan Wolf is from Beyond Plastics is asked this question all the time, and she's always like, we don't know yet. There isn't an answer for this yet. However, more and more doctors are becoming informed about plastics and how it is made. So you see a lot more research coming out. It's reported on in the news more. I mean, it's much more prevalent now than it's ever been. And so I think if we can keep the conversation going and people providing research that documents the health hazards, and there may always be some things that have to be made with plastic, but it certainly doesn't need to be where we are today. And if they're planning to triple production by 2050, where in the world are we putting all of this waste?
Right. And you really hit on something that resonated with me, which is, some things, some things may need to be made with plastic, but it certainly doesn't need to be at the scale that it is today. And, Catherine Hayhoe in Saving Us talks about meeting with the board of directors for like an oil company or something like that. And so she had to go in there and pitch green energy, but not make them all feel bad because she didn't want them to shut down and walk out of the room. And she said she realized, I'm grateful for what fossil fuels have done for us as a society so far. Has allowed us to make all this progress and that sort of thing. But she felt like, and so she pitched it. She said, wow, it's really great what, the various things that fossil fuels have allowed, but now it's time for something new. And, and that's, I think, you could say a lot, about, plastic. Sure, they have allowed for a much more sterile, there's more sterility and safe measures in some of the medical practices and prosthetic, limbs and stuff like that. But, it's time to find some other alternatives for all these other things that we have. It's the single-use plastic, the water bottles, the ubiquitous, the straws that are everywhere, the plastic bags that are everywhere, the tons of packaging. Like, to me, that's the sort of thing that we need to focus on. And that gives us a little more time to focus on, to figure out the harder questions, of what do we do about those other products. So I'm not a plastics expert though. So Shawnee says, Stop and Shop now commingles all the cans, bottles, glass they take, making them totally useless. I always wonder what they do with the plastic bags they collect, making me feel like I'm doing the right thing, even while suspecting they get tossed. That's interesting. Shani, when I go to Stop and Shop and I have to like separate out to like the plastic bottles, which I almost never have any. If we have any, it's usually like aluminum cans. But it's usually cans, but they're still all separate for me. It's Stop and Shop, but I live in the eastern section of the state where maybe they're, we're slow adopters. That'd be disappointing. I mean, I think can you comment on single stream recycling? I feel like that was sort of where the wheels really fell off the wagon in terms of recycling being an effective strategy.
Well, I don't think it was ever really an effective strategy.
Okay.
I think we were all made to believe that this is our fault, that it's our fault that we can't quite get recycling right, that we can't put things in the right place, or that, first of all, the plastic pollution problem isn't the consumer's fault. It is surrounding us. So, but yes, plastic needs to be cleaned. It needs to be sorted. As you saw in the movie, there's so many different types, colors, like black plastic. Black plastic can never be recycled because the readers can't pick it up because of the color. So there are so many nuances to this that most of our plastic ends up either being burned, or most of it in the United States goes into our land.
So folks, we are almost at 8:30, and I just want to, if anyone has any other questions, just drop them in the chat. I'm going to share my screen because I want you to be able to see some of our upcoming events before we have to go. Nope, that's not what I wanted. I want this. So I hope you can see. You'll also get these links. So we have a webinar on the Clean Cars and Clean Trucks vehicle emissions regulations. It's coming up on Monday, October 30th. I highly encourage you to go. You will understand the benefits of these regulations, why they are currently being opposed, and how you can help get them across the finish line. These are regulations that have been proposed in response to legislation that has been passed. So these laws have been passed stating that we need better emission standards for both cars and trucks in Connecticut. And these regulations are proposed. They are currently in front of what is called the Legislative Regulation Review Committee, which is supposed to only judge regulations on their legal compliance with the law. They're not supposed to be judging them on whether or not they like the regulations. So please join us for that webinar, because the Regulation Review Committee will be voting probably at the end of November. And we really need to encourage them to adopt these regulations as they do adhere to the law. And if any people who don't like the regulations want to make changes, they need to go through the legislative process the way we did when we got them passed in the first place. So anyway, I just wanted to highlight some of these upcoming webinars for you. Let me see if I find any more Q&A. Joe said, will we receive the links to sign up for the upcoming webinars? Yes, Joe, you sure will. I'm going to get that out immediately. And let's see here. Oh, Suzette wanted can you repeat your comments about recycling only number 1 and number 2 plastics? The rest just go to the garbage stream?
Yeah, so you can really just throw the rest away. If you look at the bottom of any plastic container, it has your little resin number in the triangle. So really only 1s and 2s are recycled. There are a few places, not very many, but a few places across the country that will recycle number 5s, but hardly any communities have the ability to do that. So when people say just like, it's kind of, we call it wish cycling. People put a ton of stuff in their recycling bin and they hope that it gets recycled, but really only 1s and 2s are being recycled. And that still makes up the 5 to 6% total. So everything else should just go in the trash.
And Lynn wanted me to remind everyone of No Straw November, which is a movement to get rid of straws in November. Certainly it's pretty simple to do. I love my reusable cups that I bring with me everywhere. I have been known to say, well, I guess I just won't have coffee today because I forgot my reusable cup. It's a harsh penalty to pay, though. All right, does anyone have any more questions? Thank you, Suzette. Thank you so much for joining us for this. The presentation was great. And if you don't mind, I mean, I don't know if you're allowed to sort of send me the PDF. I'm happy to put it up on our website so people can see it. This is being recorded, so the recording will go up on our YouTube channel. You'll be able to access it through our website as well. Tom, thank you so much for all your hard work putting this together. We're really so grateful for you as well, and for everyone who joined us on this sort of, well, finally it stopped raining, but wet Saturday evening.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Terry. Thanks, Suzette.
Thank you, guys.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Have a great night.
You too.